Yes, so you have 2 assignments for this week. There's another little one for the pre-production. So this week you'll be doing a storyboard. And again, I've had a few people ask, if you want to change your clip up to this point, you're more than welcome to do that. But this is sort of like the last week where you should be playing with your clip, since you're going to start doing the more sort of production work where you're, again, like storyboarding and doing stuff that'll actually show up at least in the demo, like real breakdown for your final. So storyboard, basically just take your chosen clip and create a storyboard for it with your objects and your environment. And the goal of this is to basically, again, explore how you represent the human motion, et cetera, but to sort of see how your objects will play in the space that you've created. Maybe you realized early that, like, oh, the proportions of these objects are different to the original actors, so I'm going to need to orient the camera in a different way to sort of get that motion across. Again, just sort of planning ahead how your scene is going to be set up in relation to the original. So requirements for this: at least 1 drawn frame per major action in your chosen clip, and that's like the minimum. So that would be something where I would say like a jump, like a character jumping would be sort of like a, quote unquote major action. So like the bare minimum that you do for that is like show a frame with the character in the air and like an arrow pointing up and an arrow pointing down and like a note that says they jumped. So that would be like kind of the minimum I would expect. Ideally, you might do something where they are sort of like bending their knees a little bit and then they're like in the air on the next frame and then they've sort of landed. But basically just, you don't need to do like every step across a room. Maybe just do one where they're like, they've entered in the doorway, they're like halfway to you, and then they're like kind of closer to wherever they should be at the end. But I should be able to look at this at your storyboard and basically figure out, all right, how are the characters actually moving through the scene? And then just do a PNG to submit your files, PNG or TIFF of all of your drawn frames. And then organize, like lay them out in order. If you have multiple files, label them something logical, like storyboard page 1, storyboard page 2, so I know what the heck order I'm looking at stuff in. And then each drawing should have some kind of neat frame or border around it. And if I'm not opposed to you guys hand drawing your images. I'll go over that in a bit. And I'm not saying you guys need to use like some predefined, like printed thing laid out with perfect boxes and rulers. Like, kind of do whatever works for you guys, but it do at least try to make your stuff, relatively square if you're hand drawing it, and like lay it out so it's not like curving up the side of your page awkwardly, etc. Does that make sense? Cool. And then just sort of suggestions for more points. Again, I realize not everyone's like a master artist. I'm not saying you guys are going to need to spend like 8 hours drawing this. But at least add some kind of like distinctive features to your characters, or at a bare minimum, label them if they're all sort of like stick vegetables or if they're all carrots, so I can tell what I'm looking at. Yep.
So are we drawing them as the objects we're going to have them in the scene?
Correct. Yeah. So all the characters will be like your household objects and stuff. And that's honestly mostly because like, I don't know. I remember when I was in school, I was always like, they made a storyboard existing movies, and I was like, but this is already done. Like, it just bothered me. So yeah, I'm gonna have you guys do it with your actual objects. Any other questions? All right. All right, so other notes. I'm not gonna require you guys to label like your cameras or your shots or anything like that. If it helps you to do it or to add like your own kind of notation about how you want that done, go for it, but it's not something I'm requiring. And again, I have no objection with you guys hand drawing frames with like pen and paper. And again, I'll go over I have like some hints about like how to take good, ungross looking photos of your hand-drawn images if you can't get to like a scanner or something like that, which I'll go over in a sec. But other things that was like point breakdowns. So again, quality of drawings and notes. So I expect more notes if your drawings are like kind of dodgy. But I'm basically just looking for, can I tell what's happening from your drawings and your notes? And then I'm also grading you on the sufficient illustration quantity, and that's just, again, the more images you have to represent the motion without needing like a bunch of arrows and a thing that says jump in your scene. And also do keep in mind that you'll be using these sort of for your demo reel. Did I go over the demo reel with you guys? What that is for like the sort of end, like later part of the final? All right. I thought I went over that like week 1, but apparently I did not. So just really quick with the demo reel. It's basically going to be a little breakdown of how you made part of your clip. So it's going to be usually, and you can set these up in different ways. Usually it'll be something where like the screen is broken down into 4 panes, and say in the top left you have like the original clip playing, you can see the original action. The next frame might be the storyboard, and that's going to be like when you take your storyboard and you basically animate it. So like take all your little still frames and time them up so that they play in sync with the original clip. The next one's going to be some kind of work in progress animation, and then the other thing that's going to be displayed is the final nice rendered animation. So when you're doing your storyboard, just make sure that you have enough images. Like if you were to, again, like basically turn them into like a little mini animatic and time them to the sound, if you have like 3 different images for the entire 30 seconds, that's not enough. So think of it again as if you're watching like an animation that should be like kind of dynamic, otherwise it's gonna look really, really dumb in your demo reel. Does that make sense? Okay. But yeah, so that's that. Where am I? Where's my cursor? Holy crap. Tra-la-la, notes. All right, and then again, what to submit? Just do a series of PNGs or TIFFs, and just again, label them logically and sequentially so I know what I'm looking at. And there is no need to zip these unless you have like 40 images. If it's like 1 to 5, you just upload them all individually if that's easier. And then I promised you talk of hand-drawn stuff for hand-drawn images. So again, I don't have any objection with you guys using hand-drawn images. Specifically, I have them under the orthographic section of this sort of like generic submission guidelines doc. Under hand-drawn reference. The same thing applies for your storyboards. So if you have like a tablet and you want to do it in Photoshop, great. If you're like me, I kind of prefer drawing on paper. So if you do that, there's a few things to look out for. If you're going to draw on pencil, make sure that your drawings are like dark enough to see. I know like I have a really light touch when I draw, so I usually have to trace over stuff in pen or like go in and digitally edit it in Photoshop so that my pencil markings are darker. If you can, scanning the pages into your computer is probably like the best thing to do. It's going to avoid a lot of like sketchy shadowing. But I realize that that's not always a possibility, or it's just like a huge hassle, and I don't want to make you guys like pay to scan stuff at the photo center. So there is sort of like a way that you can do it with your phone that usually works pretty well. So I'm just going to actually like turn on the lights for 5 seconds and like demo that real quick. Because it's, I don't know, it was worked really, really nicely for me in the past. Everybody else is breaking one room during all the lights. But yeah, so I found that a good way to, if you ever need to get pictures of like a photo that you, or something that you've drawn, without having a bunch of like horrible shadowing on the image, like with foam shadow on it, or that weird thing where like one part of the page is really overexposed and the other side looks super shadowy and gross looking. Pick a source of light, a window or like a computer screen. In this case, imagine that this is the source of light. And then take your drawn thing. I'm just going to say that this is like my notebook or whatever, and hold it like perpendicular to it so the light is shining across the page. And then you just like snap a picture with your phone from the other side. So then the light's like kind of shining across the page rather than like doing something like this, which is probably going to cause like again weird phone shadowing on your image. So if you guys do again hand-drawn reference, I will take off points if it's like horrible quality images with like a lot of crazy shadowing and stuff like that on it. And how you get those images to look nice, I don't really care. Again, you can edit them in Photoshop. I just threw the mic. But that's just what I found to work pretty nicely for me. So that is basically the storyboard for this week. Are there any questions on that? Alrighty then. Oh God, oh no. I've closed something. Hey, all right. All right, the other thing that you guys are gonna be doing for the actual like animation sort of production assignment is basically a ride along or like along for the ride. Essentially, this is going to be use camera motion, so camera motion is required in this one, to take the viewer along for some kind of ride. Where it is, what happens is pretty much up to you along the way. I have some suggestions of like stuff that I see a lot, so like roller coasters, spaceships going through asteroid fields. When I did this, I made a maze and I attached my camera to like the front of a rat, had him run through the maze, find cheese, and then die. So feel free to get weird with it if you want. Yes.
Well, you just answered that, but I gotta say, can I have him riding a robotic beetle?
I see no reason that it is significantly worse than a dying rat.
Okay.
Yeah, so yeah, again, get creative with it. I do see a lot of roller coasters. So that'll probably get like less points for originality than some other thing would. But yeah, so those are just like some generic examples. In terms of actual requirements, this one should be at least 15 seconds long. If you want to go longer, you're welcome to. And again, the camera must move through the scene somehow. And that should be, I don't really care how you move it, it just needs to move. And that is, yeah.
So the camera isn't the person's eye perspective. You can have it where it's like looking at the object entirely, not the time to ride it.
Yeah, I think you can do, so there's, I do actually have some examples for this one. Do you guys want to look at that before we go over the rest of it, or?
Yeah.
Okay. Cool. Where am I going? Syllabus. All right, yeah, so ride along. So there's like sort of two ways I usually see this approach. So the first one is like this, where it's the camera and it's just gonna follow this balloon throughout a scene. And it just sort of goes around and again, it's tracking the balloon. Incidentally, I think one thing that makes this camera angle kind of work is the fact that like there's a pretty whippy motion when it goes into the window of that building with the camera. But since the balloon is sort of fairly stationary right here, where the balloon is like pretty stationary and seen, you have something to focus on, so it doesn't feel as crazy aggressive, and it doesn't make you, at least it doesn't make me feel particularly ill watching that, if that makes sense. But yeah, so again, that's one thing you can do. And I'm still looking for like stuff in the beginning where like the balloon wiggles a little bit before breaking loose, like that kind of extra secondary motion is still something that I want to see in the other animated like non-camera objects in your scene. Questions about this one? All right. You can also do something like first person if you wanted to. Here's another example of one where it's just sort of like following the motion of this train, and then it sort of like punches through the window and like goes around a bit. Yeah, no, like I really actually like the camera movement in this one a lot. But I think this one's really successful. I don't know if they were like recreating something from like an existing movie or something like that. If anybody recognizes this from anything, because it feels really familiar. I just don't know why. But yeah, so I mean, this one does a really nice job of sort of having like secondary motion in the camera, but also the subway itself. And then the fact that like all the lights are passing also helps to create a sense of movement. And even they do have some fairly whippy camera movement, but the fact that they've rendered this with motion blur, which I'm not requiring for any of your weekly assignments. It'll make it look nicer. For the final, it will be a requirement to use motion blur. It depends on the renderer. There's usually a setting or like a tab in the render settings for motion blur. I think it's pretty similar for both Arnold and Redshift. But yeah, I can go over that at some point later if you like. But yeah, so again, like they have some whippy camera motions, but I think the fact that it's motion blurred out, so it's kind of like a softer image being displayed, kind of helps to mitigate any, again, feelings of nausea that might otherwise be incurred, like right here, where the camera like shoots down. But yeah, so this would be, I would say like a really, really good example of like nice lighting, nice texturing, nice camera movement. Like this is just a very well done piece. But yeah, so those are the examples. Any questions about those before we continue with the assignment requirements? All right. But yes, so camera must move through the scene. Again, that's more like, so pretty much what both of those cameras just did. Like, the camera needs to be physically moving throughout space. It can't just be like stationary and then you have like a little jiggle or like it falls over. It does need to, again, be actually moving through the scene as if you're like walking around with it. Apart from that, just the generic make your stuff look nice. Specific to this assignment and any other ones where you have moving cameras, you'll also get more points for like not making people feel like they want to vomit when looking at your camera. Because a lot of time, like, I don't get particularly motion sick, but again, like certain really, really whippy camera motions or like certain camera motions will make people just feel ill if they're prone to motion sickness. So try to avoid that. It might be good before you start rendering to like take a play blast of your stuff and like show it to some people. And if they kind of look at it and go like, oh, like that was really jarring, you might want to like tweak the camera motions in that particular area. But again, usually my general rules, try to avoid anything that's like super whippy where the camera's like slinging through space really fast, or like really sharp where it's the camera like goes down and like all of a sudden like kicks back up. Does that make sense? Cool. Apart from that, again, as usual, it's highly recommended to research the subject matter of your animation. And this is just like a weird, I told this to my other class and I got a lot of laughs out of it, but I had a lot of people the first time I taught this class who, they did roller coasters and they had like tracks floating in the air just over a random HDRI. And it was really weird looking, like you had really no sense of like space or where you were. So part of this like researching stuff is understanding, like you're gonna be moving your camera through an environment. So this one, it's not like just a corner of the room, presumably. You're gonna have more things you need to look at. So it's gonna be worthwhile to figure out if there's any kind of modular or repeatable assets that you can make to make your environment feel more complete. If you have to move through it, like in the case of the balloon animation I just showed you, there was a bunch of sort of easily repeatable city buildings, which is kind of how cities work. So like that worked for the environment. For that particular one, it might have been nice to see a little bit more texturing done to things. But again, they did find easy ways to reproduce areas of that environment. Apart from that, again, just like the environment should feel complete, or at least like have legs on your roller coasters. It sounds really dumb and like people always laugh when I say it, but like there were like 10 roller coaster animations and I think one of them had like stilt legs on it. And again, you could also look into if you need to like stick stuff in an HDRI for doing like a roller coaster or something. Consider the secondary motion of the camera. So is this like something that's fixed on to the roller coaster itself, like it can't move at all, or is this something that's attached to a human head, which has a little bit of swivel? Like if the roller coaster turns, is that head going to sort of lag before moving? So consider all of that stuff when you're doing your animations. And if you do want to like just stick something on an HDRI, there was the one assignment that we looked at earlier today with like the little fence that sort of helped blend the basketball in. You can do something like that to sort of help sell the illusion of that. Any questions on any of that? Cool. Apart from that, pretty much the same point breakdown that I've been doing for the rest of things. So 1 point is for originality of the concept. Again, I see a lot of roller coasters. 1.5 for model quality, texture quality, etc. I'm also looking again at lighting quality and animation quality. And for this particular animation quality, I feel like that's the only thing that really changes for a lot of these other guidelines. But again, does the camera movement feel appropriate for the scene you've made? Is it super whippy and jerky? Does it make people feel ill when they watch it? And again, just consider like how your camera is attached to whatever you're moving it around. If it's just like a free-floating camera that's sort of like following an object, that's one thing. But again, for something like a roller coaster, is it mounted to a person or is it mounted to the roller coaster, etc. Apart from that, pretty much the same guidelines for submissions as last week. Submit me a video of the animation you have made, and also submit any kind of reference that you've used. So that could be either a link to some YouTube videos, or a zip file with like photographic reference for your models and textures, etc., that you've taken or acquired yourself. but I am requiring some reference for this. And again, that could be for animation or for environmental textures. But yeah, that's pretty much that. I've also taken, so I sort of update these like as I go, unless it's like something really like glaringly obvious. But I have sort of updated some of the original docs with some things that I look for so that I can use them in the future, but also so you guys can use them. But I do like, if I take points off of one person's thing for something, I sort of note it here, and then I'll just do that as like a standard deduction, so I don't like accidentally do different point deductions on different people's stuff. So you might, if you're ever curious about stuff like that, you can go and like review the docs from other weeks, and I'll have sort of more things in there. That's pretty much that. Any questions on that or the storyboard? Alrighty then. In that case, do you guys want to do like a 4 or 5 minute break, and then we'll come back and actually get into my stuff?